sat in the back row of his American history class, trying to make himself invisible. At 17, he had mastered the art of blending into the background, keeping his head down and avoiding eye contact with his classmates. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of high school, casting long shadows across the worn desks where 28 students sat waiting for their teacher. Mrs. entered the classroom carrying a stack of papers, her heels clicking against the linoleum floor. She was a middle-aged woman with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun, known for her strict teaching methods and no-nonsense attitude toward education. Today, she had planned a special assignment that would change everything for. "Good morning, class," she announced, setting her papers down on the wooden desk at the front of the room. "Today we're going to start our unit on American military history. I want each of you to write a short essay about someone you know who has served in the armed forces. It could be a family member, neighbor, or family friend." Felt his stomach tighten. He knew exactly who he would write about, but he also knew what would happen when his classmates found out. His mother, Sarah, was a Navy SEAL, one of the few women to have completed the grueling training program. She had served multiple tours overseas and had earned several commendations for her service. But in this small town in Ohio, people didn't understand or appreciate what that meant. As students began discussing their essay topics with their neighbors, heard the familiar voices that made his daily life miserable. Jake, the quarterback of the football team, sat 2 rows ahead with his group of friends. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with hair and a cocky smile that made teachers overlook his frequent bullying behavior. "My grandfather was in World War II, Jake announced loudly enough for half the class to hear. He fought real battles against real enemies, not like these modern soldiers who just sit around in camps all day. His friend Tyler nodded in agreement. "Yeah, my dad says the military is getting soft. They're letting women in now, pretending they can do the same job as men. It's all political correctness gone crazy." Clenched his fists under his desk, feeling the familiar anger rising in his chest. He wanted to stand up and defend his mother, to tell them about the missions she had completed and the lives she had saved. But he had learned from experience that speaking up would only make things worse. Sarah had been deployed for most of childhood. When she was home, she rarely talked about her work, following the strict confidentiality rules that governed special operations. Had grown up with a father who worked double shifts at the local factory to support them, and a mother who appeared and disappeared like a ghost, always carrying the weight of secrets she couldn't share. The other kids in town knew his mother was in the military, but they didn't know the details. To them, she was just another absent parent who had chosen career over family. They didn't see the photos on Stresser showing his mother in full combat gear, standing with her team in some distant desert. They didn't know about the medals hidden in a drawer or the commendations that praised her courage under fire. Mrs.'s voice cut through his thoughts. "Have you decided on your essay topic?" Looked up to find the entire class staring at him. His face burned with embarrassment as he realized he had been lost in his own world while everyone else had been participating in the discussion. "I'll write about my mother," he said quietly, hopping to avoid further attention. But Jake had already picked up on the opportunity to cause trouble. He turned around in his seat with that familiar smirk that meant bad news for. "Oh, that's right," Jake said in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Mom is in the military, isn't she? What does she do, work in the kitchen feeding the real soldiers?" A few students laughed and felt his cheeks burning. He wanted to correct Jake, to tell him that his mother was actually one of the most elite warriors in the world. But he also knew that revealing the truth would only lead to more mockery and disbelief. "She's a Navy SEAL," said quietly, immediately regretting the words as soon as they left his mouth. The laughter that erupted was even louder than before. Jake turned fully around now, his eyes gleaming with malicious delight. "A Navy SEAL? Are you serious? Women can't be SEALs, everyone knows that." "Actually," said Emma, a smart girl who sat near the front, "women can serve in special operations now. It's been allowed since 2016. But Jake waved her off dismissively. "Come on, Emma, just because something is technically allowed doesn't mean it actually happens. Is probably just making stuff up to sound cool." Tyler joined in, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Yeah, I'm sure his mom is a real tough guy, kicking down doors and jumping out of helicopters. Does she tuck you in at night with her machine gun?" The classroom erupted in laughter again and felt smaller than ever. Even some of the students who usually stayed out of these confrontations were smiling and whispering to each other. Mrs. tried to restore order, but the damage was already done. For the rest of the class period, endured whispered comments and stifled giggles from his classmates. When the bell finally rang, he gathered his books quickly and headed for the door, hopping to escape before anyone could corner him in the hallway. But Jake and his friends were waiting for him outside the classroom. They followed him down the hallway, continuing their mockery in voices just loud enough for other students to hear, but not loud enough for teachers to notice. "Hey," Jake called out as they walked. "Does your Navy SEAL mom know how to make a good sandwich? Because that's probably the most dangerous mission she's ever been on." "Maybe she can teach us some of her super secret combat moves," Tyler added, "like how to properly fold laundry and vacuum a room." Quickened his pace, but they stayed right behind him. Other students in the hallway began to notice the commotion, and soon there was a small crowd following them, eager to see what would happen next. The harassment continued throughout the day. In the cafeteria, Jake made loud comments about fantasy soldiers and make-believe heroes. During gym class, he suggested that his mother probably couldn't do a single push-up. By the end of the school day, it seemed like half the student body had heard about delusional claims regarding his mother's military service. Walked home alone, his backpack feeling heavier with each step. The tree-lined streets of his neighborhood usually brought him comfort, but today even the familiar sights couldn't lift his spirits. He passed the small houses with their neat lawns and white picket fences, wondering if the people inside understood what real sacrifice looked like. When he reached his own house, a modest two-story building with blue shutters and a small front porch, he found his father's car in the driveway. David worked the evening shift at the manufacturing plant, so seeing him home this early usually meant something was wrong. Entered through the front door and found his parents sitting at the kitchen table, looking more serious than usual. His mother was wearing her civilian clothes, jeans, and a simple t-shirt, but even in casual attire, she carried herself with the unmistakable bearing of a professional soldier. Sarah was not physically imposing in the way that movies portrayed female action heroes. She was average height with brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. But there was something in her eyes, a depth of experience and quiet confidence that set her apart from other parents in the neighborhood. "How was school today?" she asked as dropped his backpack by the door. "Fine," he replied automatically, not wanting to burden them with his problems. But Sarah had spent years reading people and situations. She could tell when someone was lying, especially her own son. "We need to talk. Sit down." He reluctantly took a seat at the table, dreading what was coming next. Had someone from school already called? Had word of the classroom incident somehow reached his parents? "I got orders today," Sarah said gently. "I'm being deployed again. We leave in 2 weeks." Felt his heart sink. Another deployment meant months of his mother being away, months of wondering if she was safe, months of dealing with school bullies without her support. But he had learned not to show his disappointment. Military families were supposed to be strong. "How long this time?" he asked. 6 months, possibly longer depending on the situation, his father answered. David was a quiet man with calloused hands and tired eyes, someone who had spent his entire adult life supporting a family while his wife served their country. Sarah reached across the table and took his hand. "I know this isn't easy. I know having a mother who's gone all the time makes things complicated for you at school and with your friends." If only she knew how complicated, thought. But he couldn't bring himself to tell her about the mockery and disbelief he faced every day. She had enough to worry about without adding his social problems to the list. "I'm proud of what you do," said, and he meant it. Despite the problems it caused him, he genuinely admired his mother's service and dedication. That evening at dinner, they tried to maintain a sense of normalcy. Sarah talked about her upcoming training exercises, careful to avoid any classified details. David discussed his work at the factory and the overtime shifts he would be picking up while she was gone, pretended that everything at school was fine and that he was looking forward to writing his history essay. But later that night, lying in his bed and staring at the ceiling, wrestled with conflicting emotions. He was proud of his mother and her achievements, but he was also tired of being different, tired of having a family that didn't fit the normal suburban pattern. As he finally drifted off to sleep, had no idea that his simple essay assignment would soon set in motion a series of events that would change everything. He couldn't have imagined that his quiet revelation in Mrs. Classroom would eventually lead to one of the most dramatic moments in high school's history. The next morning brought no relief from the previous day's humiliation. If anything, word had spread overnight, and more students seemed to know about ridiculous claims regarding his mother. He heard whispers in the hallways and noticed students pointing at him as he walked to his locker. In first period English, tried to focus on the lesson about narrative structure, but his mind kept wandering to the essay he would have to write for Mrs. Class. How could he possibly write about his mother's service without inviting more ridicule? But how could he write about anyone else when she was the person he admired most in the world? The morning classes passed in a blur of attempted concentration and growing anxiety. By the time lunch arrived, had decided to skip the cafeteria entirely. He couldn't face another session of public mockery, especially not in front of the entire school during the busiest social period of the day. Instead, he found refuge in the library, a quiet sanctuary where Mrs. the librarian maintained strict rules about noise and behavior. He sat at a corner table with a book he wasn't really reading, grateful for the peaceful atmosphere. But even the library couldn't provide complete protection. About halfway through lunch period, Jake appeared with two of his friends. They had apparently decided to seek him out, not content to wait for their paths to cross naturally. "There he is," Jake announced in an exaggerated whisper that was still loud enough to draw attention. "Our very own military family celebrity." Mrs. looked up from her desk with a stern expression, but Jake was careful to keep his voice just below the threshold that would earn him a reprimand. He had perfected the art of harassment that flew under the radar of adult supervision. "We were just wondering," Tyler said as they approached his table, "if your mom ever told you any cool war stories. You know, about all those dangerous missions she definitely went on." Closed his book and prepared to leave, but Jake stepped around to block his path. They had him trapped in the corner, and other students in the library were beginning to notice the confrontation. "Come on," Jake continued. "Don't be shy. Tell us about how your Navy SEAL mom saved the world. We're all really interested to hear about her super-secret adventures." The sarcasm in his voice was thick enough to cut, and felt his anger rising. These boys had no idea what they were talking about. They had no idea what his mother had sacrificed or what she had accomplished. But he also knew that defending her would only lead to more mockery. "Leave me alone," said quietly, gathering his things. "Oh, we're just trying to learn," Tyler said with mock innocence. "Our history teacher wants us to write about military heroes, and you're the only one in class with a real live-action movie star for a mom." The other students in the library were openly starring now, some of them smiling at the entertainment. Felt trapped and humiliated, desperate to escape, but unable to see a way out that wouldn't make things worse. That's when Emma appeared at their table. She was one of the students in their grade, someone who usually stayed out of social drama but wasn't afraid to speak up when she saw injustice. "You guys are being jerks," she said simply, looking directly at Jake. "Maybe instead of making fun of something you don't understand, you should actually learn about it." Jake turned his attention to her, his expression shifting to the charming smile he used when talking to girls he wanted to impress. "Hey, Emma, we're just having a friendly conversation here. No need to get involved." "It's not friendly when three people corner someone who's trying to read," Emma replied. "And it's not conversation when you're just making jokes at his expense." Mrs. had noticed the growing tension and was beginning to make her way over from her desk. Jake saw her approach and realized it was time to make a strategic retreat. "Whatever," he said with a dismissive wave. "Come on, guys, let's leave to his fantasy stories." As they walked away, Tyler couldn't resist one final comment. "Don't forget to ask your mom for some bedtime stories about her heroic adventures." After they left, Emma sat down across from. She was a petite girl with dark hair and serious brown eyes, someone who had always been friendly to him but never really a close friend. "Are you okay?" she asked. Nodded, though he clearly wasn't. "Thanks for standing up for me. You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," Emma replied. "What they're doing isn't right, and for what it's worth, I believe you about your mom." Looked at her with surprise. "You do?" "My uncle is in the army," Emma explained. "He told me about some of the women who serve in special operations. He said they have to be even tougher than the men because they face extra challenges and scrutiny. If your mom is really a Navy SEAL, then she's probably one of the most capable people in the world. For the first time in days, felt a glimmer of hope. Someone believed him. Someone understood that what his mother did was real and important. She is, said quietly. She's deployed right now, and she can't talk about most of what she does, but I know it's dangerous and important. Emma nodded thoughtfully. That must be really hard, having her gone all the time and not being able to talk about it. Had never really discussed these feelings with anyone before, and he found himself opening up to Emma in a way that surprised him. Sometimes I wish she had a normal job. It would make everything easier. But then I think about how many people she's probably helped, and I feel guilty for wanting her to be different. You shouldn't feel guilty, Emma said. It's okay to wish things were easier while still being proud of her. Their conversation was interrupted by the lunch bell, signaling the end of the period. As they gathered their things, Emma made a suggestion that would prove to be crucial to everything that followed. You should write your essay exactly the way you want to, she said. Tell the truth about your mom and what she does. Don't let those idiots make you ashamed of something you should be proud of. As they left the library together, thought about her words. Maybe Emma was right. Maybe it was time to stop hiding and start defending the truth about his mother's service. He had no idea that his decision to write honestly about Sarah would soon bring unexpected visitors to high school, visitors who would change everything. 3 days later, sat at his desk at home, staring at a blank sheet of paper. The deadline for Mrs. essay was approaching, and he still hadn't written a single word. His laptop screen glowed in the dim light of his bedroom, the cursor blinking mockingly at the empty document. He had been thinking about Emma's words constantly since their conversation in the library. She was right that he shouldn't be ashamed of his mother's service, but he also knew what would happen when he submitted an essay about a female Navy SEAL. The mockery would intensify, and more students would join in the harassment. Sarah had left for her deployment the day before, and the house felt empty without her presence. Missed the quiet confidence she brought to every situation, the way she could solve problems with calm efficiency. David was working late again, trying to earn extra money while his wife was overseas, so was alone with his thoughts and his difficult decision. He opened his mother's bedroom door and stepped inside, looking around at the sparse decorations and carefully organized belongings. Sarah kept her military life mostly separate from her home life, but there were small hints of her career scattered throughout the room. On her dresser sat a single framed photograph that most visitors would assume was from a family vacation. But it showed his mother with her SEAL team after completing a successful mission in Afghanistan. She was the only woman in the group, standing confidently among 7 men who clearly respected her as an equal. Next to the photo was a small wooden box that had never been allowed to open. He knew it contained her medals and commendations, the tangible proof of her courage and skill that she kept hidden from the world. She had once told him that real heroes didn't display their achievements like trophies, they carried them quietly in their hearts. Picked up the photograph and studied his mother's face. Even in the harsh desert sunlight, surrounded by the evidence of combat operations, she looked calm and determined. This was the woman that his classmates thought was imaginary, the person they believed couldn't exist. Returning to his room with new resolve, began to write. He decided to tell the truth, the whole truth about Sarah and her service to their country. He wrote about her training, about the physical and mental challenges she had overcome to earn her place among the nation's elite warriors. He wrote about the deployments, the long absences, and the sacrifices their entire family had made, but was careful not to include any classified information. He stuck to the facts that were publicly available about female participation in special operations, and he focused on the personal impact of having a mother in such a demanding career. As he wrote, found himself feeling proud instead of defensive. This was his mother, a woman who had achieved something extraordinary in a field dominated by men. She had proven herself again and again, earning the respect of her peers through skill, courage, and determination. The essay took him most of the evening to complete. By the time he finished, it was nearly midnight, and he had written 4 pages about Sarah's journey from a small-town girl in Ohio to one of the Navy's most elite operators. He read through it twice, making small corrections, before finally printing it out and placing it in his backpack. The next morning at school, felt nervous but determined. He had decided to face whatever consequences came from telling the truth about his mother. As he walked through the hallways, he noticed that some students were still whispering and pointing, but their attention seemed less focused than it had been earlier in the week. In first period, tried to concentrate on his algebra homework, but his mind kept drifting to Mrs. Class and the essay burning a hole in his backpack. He wondered if she would believe what he had written, or if she would dismiss it as the fantasy that his classmates claimed it to be. When third period finally arrived, walked into the history classroom with his essay folded carefully in his hand. Other students were chatting about their projects, and he overheard several discussions about grandfathers who had served in World War II and fathers who had been in Vietnam. Mrs. was arranging papers on her desk when approached. She looked up with her usual stern expression, but there was a hint of curiosity in her eyes. "Mister," she said, "I trust you have your essay completed." "Yes, ma'am," replied, handing her the folded pages. "I wrote about my mother." Mrs. took the essay and glanced at the first few lines. Her eyebrows rose slightly as she read the opening paragraph, which clearly stated that Sarah was a Navy SEAL currently deployed on a classified mission overseas. "This is quite interesting," she said carefully. "I look forward to reading it thoroughly." As returned to his seat, he noticed Jake watching him with suspicious interest. Jake had apparently seen him talking to Mrs. and was probably wondering what new lies had concocted for his essay. The class period proceeded normally, with Mrs. lecturing about the role of the military in American foreign policy. Found himself paying closer attention than usual, thinking about how his mother's work fit into the larger picture of national security that they were discussing. When the bell rang, Jake intercepted at the door. "So what did you write about for your essay?" he asked with feigned casualness. "My mother's military service," replied honestly. Jake's grin widened. "Oh, this should be good. I can't wait to hear Mrs. read about your mom's imaginary adventures." Didn't respond, but he felt a flutter of anxiety in his stomach. He hadn't considered the possibility that Mrs. might read the essays aloud to the class. The thought of having his personal family story subjected to public mockery was almost unbearable. The rest of the day passed slowly, with distracted in every class. He found himself watching the clock, dreading the next day's history period when essays would likely be returned and discussed. That evening, called his mother using the secure communication system the military provided for deployed personnel. The connection was scratchy and had a slight delay, but it was comforting to hear her voice. "How's school going?" Sarah asked after they had exchanged basic pleasantries. Hesitated, still reluctant to burden her with his social problems, but something in her tone suggested that she already knew something was wrong. "It's okay," he said. "I wrote an essay about you for history class." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "What kind of essay?" "About your military service. The teacher asked us to write about someone we know who served in the armed forces." Another pause, longer this time. "Did you include any specific details about my work?" "No, nothing classified," assured her. "Just the public information about female SEALs and what it means for our family." Sarah's voice became more serious. "Are you having problems at school because of my job?" Had always been a terrible liar, especially when talking to his mother. Something about her training made her exceptionally good at detecting deception, even over a poor phone connection. "Some of the kids don't believe it," he admitted. "They think I'm making it up." "I'm sorry," Sarah said quietly. "I know having a parent in this job creates complications for you, but you should never be ashamed of telling the truth about our family." "I'm not ashamed," replied. "I'm proud of you. It's just hard when people think you're lying about something so important." "The truth has a way of revealing itself," Sarah said. "Trust in that and don't let other people's ignorance affect how you feel about our family." After they hung up, felt better about his decision to write honestly about his mother's service. Whatever happened with his classmates, he had told the truth, and that was what mattered. The next day brought an unexpected development. As was walking to his locker before first period, he overheard a conversation between two teachers in the hallway. "Did you read essay?" one of them was saying. "The one about his mother being a Navy SEAL," the other replied. "I'm not sure what to make of that." "Mrs. showed it to me," the first teacher continued. "If it's true, it's quite remarkable, but it seems almost too extraordinary to believe." hurried past them, his face burning with embarrassment. Even the teachers were discussing his essay and questioning its truthfulness. He began to wonder if submitting the essay had been a terrible mistake. In Mrs. class that day, she announced that she would be returning the essays throughout the week and having individual conferences with students about their work. Would be one of the first to meet with her, which meant his anxiety would be resolved quickly one way or another. When Mrs. called him to her desk after class, approached nervously, she held his essay in her hands and her expression was unreadable. "Mister," she began, "this is a very well-written piece about your mother's military service. However, I need to ask you directly, is this information accurate?" Met her gaze steadily. "Yes, ma'am, every word of it." Mrs. studied his face for a long moment. "You understand that this is quite extraordinary. Female participation in special operations is still very limited." "I understand that," replied. "But my mother is one of the women who made it through the program. She's been deployed multiple times." Mrs. nodded slowly. "If this is true, then your mother is quite remarkable, and you should be very proud of her service." "I am proud of her," said. "However," Mrs. continued, "I think you should be prepared for some skepticism from your classmates. This kind of achievement is so rare that some people might find it difficult to believe." Left the classroom feeling both validated and apprehensive. Mrs. clearly believed his essay, but she had also warned him about the reaction from other students. He could only imagine what Jake would say when he found out that had apparently convinced their teacher that his fantasy mother was real. During lunch, Emma found in the library again. She had been watching him throughout the morning and could tell that something was bothering him. "How did your essay go?" she asked, sitting down across from him. "Mrs. believed it," said, "but I think word is getting around to other teachers and they're not all sure what to think." Emma nodded sympathetically. The truth is sometimes harder to believe than fiction, especially when it challenges people's assumptions. "I'm starting to think I should have just written about someone else," admitted. "This is turning into a bigger deal than I expected." "No," Emma said firmly. "You did the right thing. Your mom deserves to have her service recognized and respected, not hidden because it makes other people uncomfortable." As they talked, neither nor Emma noticed that Jake had entered the library with several of his friends. He had been looking for, eager to get more details about the essay that was apparently causing such discussion among the faculty. Jake approached their table with his usual confident swagger, but there was something different about his demeanor today. He seemed more agitated than amused, as if the continued attention on his essay was personally offensive to him. "So I heard Mrs. actually believed your creative writing project," Jake said without preamble. Looked up at him warily. "It wasn't creative writing, it was a factual essay about my mother's military service." "Right," Jake said with exaggerated nodding. "And I'm sure next you'll be telling us that your dad is a secret agent and your grandmother is an astronaut." Emma stood up from her chair, her patience with Jake's behavior finally exhausted. "Why can't you just accept that you might be wrong about this?" Jake turned to her with a condescending smile. "Because, Emma, I live in the real world. Navy SEALs are elite soldiers who go through years of incredibly difficult training. They're the toughest guys in the military. The idea that some suburban mom from Ohio is one of them is ridiculous." "Women have been allowed in special operations since 2016, Emma replied. "It's documented fact." "Allowed, sure," Tyler chimed in. "But that doesn't mean any of them actually made it through the training. Is just taking advantage of people's political correctness to make his family sound more interesting than it really is." Felt his anger rising, but before he could respond, Mrs. appeared at their table. She had been watching the confrontation from her desk and decided it was time to intervene. "This is a library," she said sternly. "If you want to have a debate, you can take it somewhere else." Jake and his friends reluctantly moved away, but not before Tyler made one final comment. "Don't worry, your secret is safe with us. We won't tell anyone that your essay is complete fiction." As they left, Emma sat back down and looked at with concern. "They're really not going to let this go, are they?" Shook his head. "I don't think so. And now it's getting worse because some of the teachers believe me and some don't, so it's becoming a bigger controversy." "Maybe that's not such a bad thing," Emma suggested. "Maybe it's time for people to learn about what your mom actually does." Wasn't sure if he agreed. The attention was becoming overwhelming, and he was beginning to wonder if defending his mother's honor was worth the social cost he was paying. But as he thought about Sarah, currently deployed in some dangerous location he couldn't even imagine, he knew he couldn't back down now. Unknown to, Mrs. had spent her lunch break researching female participation in Navy SEAL training. What she found convinced her that it was not only possible but likely true. She had also made a phone call that would soon bring unexpected visitors to high school, visitors who would settle the question of Sarah's military service once and for all. The following Monday morning brought an atmosphere of anticipation to high school that couldn't quite understand. As he walked through the hallways, he noticed small groups of students whispering among themselves, and several teachers seemed unusually alert and organized. Mrs. had spent the weekend making phone calls and sending emails. Her research into female Navy SEALs had led her to contact the Naval Special Warfare Command's Public Affairs Office. She had explained the situation at her school, describing the controversy surrounding SES and the need for factual information about women in special operations. What she hadn't expected was the response she received. After verifying Smother's identity and service record through proper channels, the Navy had offered to send representatives to the school for an educational presentation about special operations careers. It was part of their ongoing recruitment and public awareness efforts, but it would also serve to address the questions about Sarah's credentials. Knew none of this as he sat in Mrs. third-period history class, trying to focus on a lesson about the Cold War. The harassment from Jake and his friends had continued throughout the previous week, and was beginning to feel worn down by the constant skepticism and mockery. Jake sat in his usual seat 2 rows ahead, occasionally turning around to smirk at or make whispered comments to his neighbors. Today he seemed particularly pleased with himself, as if he had some special knowledge that gave him confidence in his position. Mrs. said, interrupting his distracted thoughts. Since you wrote such a comprehensive essay about modern military service, perhaps you'd like to share some of your research with the class. Felt every eye in the classroom turn toward him. This was exactly the kind of attention he had been trying to avoid, but Mrs. Tone suggested that refusing wasn't really an option. What would you like me to share? Asked carefully. Tell us about the training requirements for Special Operations Forces, Mrs. suggested. What did you learn about the physical and mental challenges that these service members face? Took a deep breath and began to explain what he knew about SEAL training from his mother's carefully edited stories and his own research. He described the grueling physical conditioning, the sleep deprivation, the psychological testing, and the extreme scenarios designed to weed out all but the most determined candidates. As he spoke, noticed that most of his classmates were actually listening with genuine interest. The training he described was so intense and demanding that it commanded respect, regardless of who completed it. But Jake wasn't impressed. That all sounds very dramatic, he interrupted. But you're talking about training that's designed for elite male athletes. No woman could possibly complete that kind of program. Actually, Emma said from her seat near the front, studies have shown that women often have advantages in endurance events and pain tolerance. Some of the challenges described might actually favor female candidates. Jake rolled his eyes. Come on, Emma, be realistic. We're talking about carrying heavy equipment, underwater combat diving, and hand-to-hand combat. Basic biology says that men are going to be better at those things. Mrs. allowed the discussion to continue, watching the dynamics in the classroom carefully. She could see that the debate was becoming more heated, and she knew that the time was right for the surprise she had arranged. You raise interesting points about physical requirements, she said to Jake. Perhaps we should ask some experts. Before anyone could ask what she meant, there was a knock on the classroom door. Mrs. walked over and opened it, revealing Principal Williams accompanied by 3 men in military uniforms. The classroom fell completely silent as the 3 Navy SEALs entered. They were exactly what everyone expected elite soldiers to look like: tall, muscular, and carrying themselves with the unmistakable bearing of professional warriors. Their uniforms were crisp and decorated with ribbons and insignia that spoke of extensive combat experience. Students, Mrs. announced, I'd like you to meet Petty Officer First Class, Chief Petty Officer Mitchell, and Lieutenant Commander Hayes from the Naval Special Warfare Command. They've come to talk to us about careers in special operations. Felt his heart stop. He had no idea that his teacher had arranged this visit, and he couldn't imagine what was about to happen. He glanced around the classroom and saw that every student was sitting up, their attention completely focused on the three SEALs. Lieutenant Commander Hayes stepped forward. He was a man in his late 30s with graying hair at his temples and calm, intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. "Good morning," he said in a voice that carried natural authority. "We're here to talk about what it takes to serve in naval special warfare and to address some questions that have apparently come up in your discussions." Jake looked confused and slightly nervous. This wasn't what he had expected, and he wasn't sure how the presence of actual SEALs would affect the ongoing controversy about essay. "Before we begin," Lieutenant Commander Hayes continued, "I understand that one of your classmates wrote an essay about his mother's military service, and there's been some debate about the accuracy of that essay." Felt every eye in the room turn toward him again, but this time the attention felt different. There was anticipation rather than mockery, curiosity rather than skepticism. The lieutenant commander said, looking directly at him, "Would you stand up, please?" Rose slowly from his desk, his legs feeling unsteady beneath him. He had no idea what was about to happen, but he sensed that this moment would change everything. "I've had the privilege of serving with your mother on multiple deployments," Lieutenant Commander Hayes said clearly, his voice carrying to every corner of the silent classroom. "Petty Officer Sarah is one of the finest naval operators I've ever worked with. Her courage, skill, and dedication have saved countless lives, including my own on at least 2 occasions." The silence in the classroom was complete. Could hear his own heartbeat as he processed what he had just heard. Not only was his mother's service being validated, but it was being praised by someone who clearly commanded respect from everyone present. Chief Petty Officer Mitchell stepped forward. "Sarah completed one of the most challenging training programs in the world," he said. "She earned her place in our community through the same standards that apply to every candidate, male or female. There are no participation trophies in special operations." Petty Officer nodded in agreement. "The few women who have completed SEAL training have proven themselves to be exceptional warriors. They've earned the respect of their teammates through their actions, not through any lowered standards or special consideration." Looked around the classroom and saw faces filled with awe and understanding. His classmates were beginning to realize that everything he had written in his essay was true, and that they had been mocking the family member of one of America's elite warriors. Jake appeared stunned. His face had gone pale, and he seemed unable to process what he was hearing. The confident smirk that usually defined his expression had been replaced by something resembling shock. "Now," Lieutenant Commander Hayes said, addressing the entire class, "I'd like to clear up some misconceptions about women in special operations. The training standards are identical regardless of gender. Every candidate must complete the same physical challenges, the same mental tests, and the same tactical scenarios. The few women who have succeeded have done so because they possess the same qualities we look for in all our operators: mental toughness, physical capability, and absolute dedication to the mission and their teammates." He paused and looked around the classroom, making eye contact with several students. "Sarah embodies all of these qualities. She's currently deployed on a mission that I can't discuss, but I can tell you that her skills and experience make her invaluable to the success of that operation." Mrs. stepped forward. "I invited these here because I wanted my students to understand the reality of modern military service. Too often, our perceptions are shaped by outdated assumptions rather than current facts." Chief Petty Officer Mitchell addressed the class directly. "We understand that it might be difficult to believe that someone from your community could achieve something so extraordinary, but that's exactly what makes America's military so strong. Our best operators come from small towns and big cities, from every background you can imagine. What matters isn't where you come from, but what you're willing to sacrifice to serve your country." Found his voice for the first time since the SEALs had entered the classroom. "Thank you," he said simply, his words carrying a depth of emotion that everyone could hear. Lieutenant Commander Hayes smiled at him. "Thank you, son. Your mother would be proud to know how well you've represented her service. It takes courage to stand up for the truth, especially when people don't want to believe it." The Navy representatives spent the next 30 minutes talking about their careers, their training, and the realities of special operations work. They answered questions from students who were now genuinely curious rather than skeptical. and they provided information about military career opportunities for anyone who might be interested. Throughout this presentation, Jake sat silently in his seat, looking smaller than had ever seen him. The confident bully who had made life miserable for weeks now appeared defeated and embarrassed. When the SEALs prepared to leave, Lieutenant Commander Hayes approached one final time. "I want you to know that your mother talks about you all the time," he said quietly. "She's proud of you, and she's proud that you defend her service even when it's difficult." "Is she safe?" asked, the question that had been weighing on his mind since her deployment began. "She's with the best team in the world," the lieutenant commander replied. "And she's one of the reasons that team is so good. Don't worry about her. Worry about keeping your grades up so she'll be proud when she comes home." After the SEALs left, the classroom remained unusually quiet. Mrs. allowed the students a few minutes to process what they had just experienced before resuming the regular lesson, but could tell that everything had changed. Students who had previously ignored him were now looking at him with something approaching respect. The whispered mockery had been replaced by genuine curiosity about his mother's service. When the bell rang, several classmates approached to apologize for doubting his essay or to ask questions about his mother's career. Emma appeared at his side with a smile that conveyed both satisfaction and sympathy. "How does it feel to be vindicated?" she asked as they walked toward the door. "Surreal," admitted. "I never expected anything like this to happen." Jake was still sitting at his desk when Emma reached the door. He looked up as they passed, and for a moment thought he might say something. But Jake just nodded slightly, a gesture that might have been an apology or simply an acknowledgement of defeat. As they walked down the hallway, other students who had heard about the presentation approached with questions and comments. Word was spreading quickly through the school, and found himself at the center of positive attention for the first time in his high school career. "Your mom is like a real-life superhero," one freshman said as they passed his locker. "That's so cool that actual Navy SEALs came to school just to talk about her," added a girl from his English class. Throughout the rest of the day, teachers and students continued to approach with newfound respect and curiosity. Principal Williams stopped him in the hallway to congratulate him on his essay and to express the school's pride in having a military family in their community. When arrived home that afternoon, he found his father waiting for him with an unusual expression of excitement and pride. "I heard about what happened at school today," David said. "Mrs. called to tell me about the Navy visitors and how well you handled everything." "Did she tell you what they said about Mom?" asked. David's eyes filled with tears. "She told me that they called your mother one of the finest operators they've ever worked with. Son, I always knew your mother was special, but hearing it from her colleagues makes it even more real." That evening was able to speak with his mother again using the secure communication system. When he told her about the day's events, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. She finally said, "I'm so sorry you had to go through all that doubt and mockery. You shouldn't have to defend our family's truth to people who don't understand." "It's okay, Mom," replied. "Lieutenant Commander Hayes and the other SEALs made everything clear. Nobody questions your service anymore." "I'm proud of you for standing up for what you knew was true," Sarah said. "That takes the same kind of courage we need in this job." The next day at school brought a completely different atmosphere. Students who had previously avoided now sought him out, wanting to hear more about his mother's career and military life. Jake and his friends kept their distance, apparently deciding that their previous behavior was no longer socially acceptable. Mrs. used the momentum from the SEAL visit to launch a deeper exploration of modern military service and the changing roles of women in combat operations. Found himself serving as an informal expert, sharing appropriate details about military life and helping his classmates understand the realities of special operations careers. Emma remained his closest ally, but discovered that he had gained many new friends among students who respected his family's service and his courage in defending it. The isolation and mockery that had defined his school experience were replaced by acceptance and admiration. Several weeks later, when Sarah returned from her deployment, high school held a special assembly to honor local military families. Stood proudly on the stage as his mother was recognized for her service, surrounded by classmates who now understood the true meaning of her sacrifice and dedication. The whole classroom had mocked a teen SEAL mom until the moment real SEALs walked in and changed everything. What had begun as cruel skepticism and harassment had transformed into respect, understanding, and pride. Had learned that truth, when supported by courage and evidence, could overcome even the most stubborn ignorance. As he watched his mother receive a standing ovation from the entire school, realized that the painful experience had taught him something valuable about standing up for what he believed in, even when the odds seemed impossible. The 3 Navy SEALs who had visited his classroom had done more than validate his mother's service. They had shown him that real strength sometimes comes from the most unexpected places, and that the truth, no matter how extraordinary, will always find a way to reveal itself.